Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Gaming Tech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news, which as usual has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully, you're having an amazing day. We've got a ton of stuff to get through in today's video. It's definitely very AMD focused, but with the imminent release of the RX 6000 series, aka RDNA 2, you may be forgiven for wondering why the hell AMD are already discussing both RDNA 3 and the Zen 4 processor architecture, and we will get to that in just a moment. But the first thing I'd like to discuss actually concerns around the mining performance of the RX 6000 series. You may recall that there was a piece of news floating around that the 6800, so to be clear, the non-XT card, was actually rather capable when it comes to mining. In fact, it actually outperforms the RTX 3090 by about 50%, which would mean that in terms of not only sheer raw performance, but also value for money, miners were obviously in heaven. Not so much, however, for gamers. But since then, a couple of interesting things have happened, and a couple of my sources have actually reached out to me. Now, I want to stress these sources are, well, they've got a history of being pretty accurate, but I do not have an RX 6800 to test this on. So this information could be inaccurate, what I'm about to tell you, so the normal pinch of salt. However, I'm told that the information that mining performance of the 6800 outperforms the RTX 3090 is not accurate. And interestingly, two people told me this exact same thing, and as far as I know, neither of them have contact with one another. They are very, very independent sources. Again, they've both had a very good track record in the past for information. So what do I suggest? Well, obviously, if you're a miner, this news could potentially suck. I would suggest waiting for more benchmarks before you put your money down. And if you're a gamer and you're just, well, really hoping that this isn't true, then all I can suggest is that you do cross your fingers. The normal caveats, however, for mining, and I am not an expert at mining by any stretch of the imagination, I do not do mining, but to my understanding, each card, well, even different architectures can have a rather different performance in different kind of currencies when you're mining. So it is possible that in certain currencies, the RX 6000 series may be better, but I was told by one source that the Infinity cache itself does not lend itself so well to mining. Again, because I don't have the cards, I cannot test this independently to verify it. However, this is just what I was told, that basically the cards are not as good as the RTX 3090, well, at least the benchmarks that were revealed to be like 50% improved over the RTX 3090. So whether those benchmarks were fake or whether there was some optimizations done, I do not know. But I'm just telling you guys what I was told, that with the information that my sources have access to, again, two different sources, this does not seem to be the case. But moving on from the RDNA 2 architecture, let's move on to RDNA 3. Seems like a good idea. This information is official. So I just want to stress that this is not a leak. This is actually from AMD directly, and it's in an interview. All this information can be found in an interview with The Street. And Rick Bergman was discussing AMD's plans for future architectures for both CPU and GPU. I will, of course, link their interview in the description of this video, but there are several quotes which I find extremely interesting. Credit, by the way, to WCCF Tech, who actually reposted certain areas of this interview, so I will, of course, link their article as well in the description. But again, there are a lot of questions that were asked of from Rick, and I don't want to go over the whole thing because that's very disrespectful to The Street, so I would encourage you to check it out, but for our purposes, I really want to focus on just a few key highlights. Question: AMD is aiming for its RDNA 3 architecture, which will use a more advanced manufacturing process to deliver the performance per watt improvements similar to the 50% improvements delivered for the RDNA 2 architecture. and its future plans for Infinity Cache technology used in RDNA 2. Bergman responded, "Let's step back and talk about the benefits of both. So why did we target, pretty aggressively, performance per watt improvements for our RDNA 2 GPUs? And yes, we had the same commitment to RDNA 3. It just matters so much in many ways, because if your power is too high, as we've seen in our competitors, dig, suddenly our potential users have to buy bigger power supplies, very advanced cooling solutions, and in many ways, very importantly, it actually drives up the bill of materials of the board makeup substantially. This is from a desktop perspective, and invariably, that either means the retail price comes up or your GPU cost has to come down. So there are actually a lot of efficiencies if you can improve your performance per watt substantially. On the notebook side, that is because even more obviously, because you're in a very constrained space, you can then bring up more performance to the cooling platform without needing to resort to exotic cooling solutions. We have focused this on RDNA 2, and it's a big focus on RDNA 3 as well. On Infinity Cache, it's somewhat linked to that to a certain degree. If you've been in graphics for a long time, you'll realize there's a pretty good correlation between memory bandwidth and performance. Typically, the way you do this is jack up memory speeds and widen your memory bus to open performance. Unfortunately, both of these drive up power consumption. So basically what Rick is saying here is not only are we on a more advanced manufacturing process with RDNA 3, but they seem to be taking what principles made RDNA 2 great, i.e. the Infinity Cache, which is obviously a large chunk of cache on the GPU, 128 megabytes for the 6800 and above, which means that you don't need such fast memory bandwidth to feed the cores, and they seem to be taking those principles and then running them with them for RDNA 3. If you're a regular viewer, you will know that despite many of my RDNA 2 leaks from quite a while back, pointing to all of this information for Infinity Cache, I was also told that RDNA 3 is just as exciting as RDNA 2. In fact, some of my sources are even hinting that while RDNA 2 is certainly not bad, in fact it's very good, let's just be honest, RDNA 3 may even be more exciting than RDNA 2. And I'm hearing that there are some tremendous improvements on RDNA 3. One of those seems to be geometry performance, or basically the early stages of the pipeline, a little bit like the PlayStation 5, as I've mentioned before. Unfortunately, I'm not 100% clear exactly how that works, but it does seem that there are a number of inefficiencies that AMD are targeting throughout the entire GPU to improve for RDNA 3. Furthermore, it seems that ray tracing performance, we'll actually touch more on ray tracing in just a moment, seems to also be seeing a substantial increase for RDNA 3. Now, I just want to be clear, Nvidia are certainly not going to be resting on their hands and just chilling. We know that Nvidia are going to be very aggressive for its GPUs, which is great for us as end users, but I'm just saying that the RX 6000 series is going to be really cool, but this is not going to be just AMD's like one shot. They're not going to be like the one title champion. I couldn't think of a good analogy there. They are going to continue to push very heavily, much like we've seen with Zen 1 to Zen 2 to now Zen 3. What about Zen 4 then? Well, Rick had some words for that as well. How much performance gains delivered by AMD Zen 4 CPUs, which are expected to use the 5nm TSMC process and may arrive in early 2022, will come from IPC as opposed to either core count or clock frequency? See, the interviewer there is asking the big questions. Well, given the maturity, says Bergman, of the x86 architecture by now, the answer has to be kind of all of the above. If you looked at our technical documentation on Zen 3, it did a long list of things to get the 19% IPC gains, and Zen 4 is going to have a similar long list of things. This is where we look at everything from caches to branch prediction to the number of gates in the execution pipeline. Everything is scrutinized to squeeze more performance out. Certainly, manufacturing opens up the additional door to us to obtain better performance per watt and so on, and we'll take advantage of that as well. I want you to put a pin on that just for a moment, because I actually want to circle back to the RX 6000 series and talk about ray tracing performance. Rick said that their goal was 1440p resolution to have a great ray tracing experience, and that's the kind of performance level that we targeted. Now, it does depend on a particular game and everybody's system and so on, but I think you'll find that overall we have great ray tracing performance, and game support will be strong as we go into 2021. But you have ray tracing support on the Xbox or Sony's console, and you're supporting AMD on the PC side as well. This is actually very important because it seems that just optimizing for the, let's say, Xbox or the PlayStation does inherently give you a lot of optimization on the RDNA 2 architecture for PC. Now, of course, Microsoft's DXR, DirectX Ray Tracing, is the API of choice for the PC and Xbox platform, whereas Sony naturally use a different API. However, fundamentally, the functionality in terms of like the basics are very similar. So what I'm trying to say is, if you're developing, say, Godfall on the PlayStation 5, which obviously has ray tracing, and then you're porting that code over to, I don't know, the PC, you are not starting from scratch because there is a lot of the similar functionality there. Now, it's going to be very interesting because obviously the implementation of RDNA 2's ray tracing is a little different from what we have with Nvidia, although Nvidia seems to have the architectural advantage. It's going to be curious to see how much that plays out and how much optimization plays into things as well as we continue throughout the generation. And there is also one other thing that I'd like to touch on, and this is upsampling, which of course is going to be, at least in my opinion, probably about the most important technology we have in graphics for the next several years. Long story short, native resolution is all but dead. Sony have said this, Microsoft have said this, AMD, Nvidia, they've all said it. And the thing is, if all of these companies say that native resolution is no longer the be-all and end-all, or let's say the same about anything, if all companies agree that they need to go in a certain direction, it's happening. And native resolution is, of course, a really big topic on consoles. Everyone wants to hear those sweet words, 4K, native. But the reality is, what you're essentially doing is limiting yourself. Number of pixels is not as important as the quality of those pixels, when then you can use AI to upsample it. And AMD are coming up with their own solution. Again, I did leak this initially and said that I believed it was going to be a driver update, and AMD seems to have confirmed this. But what have AMD got to say for themselves? They said that we don't have a lot of detail that we want to talk about yet, so we called our solution FSR, Fidelity FX Super Resolution. But we are committed to getting that feature implemented, and we're working with ISVs at this point. I'll say that AMD's approach on these types of technologies planned to be a more broad platform and not require proprietary solutions. As this approach we're talking, we'll go through next year and we'll get more details on it. So it seems like the actual drivers and stuff are not going to be ready anytime soon. It seems like the implementation is even a little later than what I had originally leaked. I said that it was going to possibly be early December. But what AMD are basically talking about here is a solution which works across the Xbox, the PlayStation, and again, of course, RDNA 2 for the desktop, and we assume it will be a very similar approach for RDNA 3, albeit with additional bells and whistles. It seems that AMD are choosing an approach which is broader, i.e. I don't think it requires DLSS-like technology where you have the best way of describing it, of course, is inference, training and inference. Whereas the Nvidia implementation with deep learning super sampling uses high resolution reference images of whatever game, let's say Call of Duty, and then it will basically figure out how to scale a low resolution, say 1080p, up to 4K or what have you. AMD's seems to be a little different. I'm told it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of like the similar principle to Radeon image sharpening in that it works across more titles, but there still seems to be some level of implementation. I want to put on a tinfoil hat for just a second. I think, and I'm basing this not off of leaks, but just logic, I think that Nvidia will also fire back too. With AMD's technology, it seems that they are basically using AI upsampling, using lower precision operations on the CPU themselves. So either 4 or 8-bit instructions, which again, Microsoft semi-detailed regarding the Xbox Series X, and I believe the implementation on the PC and the PlayStation is basically identical with a few small changes here or there, probably in terms of customization. But obviously with Nvidia, with DLSS, they are using deep learning super sampling, which again is a training and inference method with the inference code running on the tensor cores of the GPU. Now this is again a guess, but if I were Nvidia and I saw the direction the wind was blowing, I would probably have a couple of different options to developers. Option one is what they are basically doing now with pushing developers to implement DLSS. And I say this as someone who's a really big fan of DLSS. I think that the quality itself is amazing. I genuinely do believe that the majority of people, yes, you will get people with really keen eyes and they will be able to spot this, but I think the majority of people playing a game like Control, upsampling from 1080p to 4K, would not notice the visual difference. But if you were to put them in a blind comparison, running, let's say, an RTX 3060, I would say that most people, if you just gave a blind comparison, would much prefer running Control with all the ray tracing enabled, all of the higher frame rates, but running at a lower resolution, rather than a native resolution with ray tracing off or quality differences. That's my guess, and honestly, DLSS now is so good, but it also seems to require a lot more work for developers. Now, AMD solution doesn't seem to be quite as good quality. Again, I'm basing this off my own information, what I'm told now from a couple of different sources, but their implementation seems to be considerably easier to implement. But it again uses the CPU, so there still will be a slight performance penalty. If I were Nvidia, I would probably have an option for developers to basically go either route, so that if they want to go the lower precision route, they can basically run that on the tensor cores of the GPU, thus freeing up more resources than if it was running on, say, the CUDA cores. I don't know if that will be the case, and I do suspect, again, Nvidia will push developers to use the traditional like AI upsampling methodology that we're seeing currently, because it does provide tremendous results, but not all developers are willing to do that, so they will probably also embrace AMD's more open source philosophy, a little bit like we saw with, say, FreeSync and G-Sync. Although I suspect that G-Sync will probably not be, I suspect, DLSS will not be quite as left behind as the G-Sync implementation. But, as always with this stuff, we can only wait and see. There is also one other story that I would like to discuss, and it concerns the RTX 3080 Ti. As you are almost doubtlessly aware at this point, Nvidia's lineup is starting to slowly fill out. We have the 3070, 3080, 3090, the 3060 Ti will launch soon. There was actually a delay on that, as I've already reported, and the 3080 Ti also was delayed. Now, to my understanding, it was originally meant to launch late December, but then it got pushed back a little bit until some point in December, some point being a magical date, which is very non-committal. But this seems to be because Nvidia did decide to change the specification of the GPUs. So now the GPU is going to feature 10,496 CUDA cores, aka basically most of the card is exactly the same configuration as the RTX 3090, but with one important difference, and that difference seems to be the memory configuration. I'm hearing that it's 20 gigabytes of RAM, which means that it's using basically the same bus configuration as the RTX 3080, but they're doubling the capacity of the RAM. Now, interesting point to this is that, of course, originally the RTX 3080 was going to have two models. It was going to have the 10 and the 20 gigabyte, but the 20 gigabyte was cancelled. And then we saw that RTX 3080 was going to launch with just slightly fewer than 10,000 CUDA cores, but it was going to feature a wider bus, albeit with just 16 gigabytes of memory, which I think honestly is plenty of RAM, but whatever. To my understanding, Nvidia had already put in a pretty large order of RAM for the 20 gigabyte models when they cancelled it. So obviously that same RAM, theoretically, can be used for the RTX 3080 Ti. Sources over at HKE PC are stating that the launch of these GPUs is now going to be in January, and I'm pretty certain, assuming there's no changes, that this date is going to be when we see the RTX 3080 Ti launch. And there's also a few other things too. The RTX 3080 Ti, I'm hearing, is really close to the 3090. Obviously, the fact of the matter is it's got the same number of CUDA cores, which is a pretty good indicator, but I'm hearing it's super, super close to the RTX 3090 within just a few points, but is going to be considerably cheaper, which obviously means that the card is going to be, let's just be honest, fairly popular. The fact that it does have less memory bandwidth, though, probably does mean it will lose in some benchmarks. Your guess is as good as mine regarding memory overclocking. And I'll also say that the RTX 3070, and this is according to another source of mine, is actually going to start becoming more plentiful in terms of inventory. I'm not allowed to share specific numbers, unfortunately, but I'm told that the RTX 3070 is going to have a considerable increase in available inventory as we move out of as we move out of Q4, and certainly by Q1, there's going to be a substantial increase in inventory for the RTX 3070. We may even see this coming into around Christmas time, but certainly Nvidia seem to be planning to just have a large glut of RTX 3070s for when we hit the new year. And of course, this is going to be mission critical because they are facing a ton of pressure at the moment from AMD across the entire lineup. It's going to be very interesting though, because no one knows what the availability of the RX 6000 series is. Now, if my information of the mining performance is wrong, and the mining performance of the 6800 is just stellar, and honestly, let's assume just for a moment that it's a halfway house between my information being wrong and that leaked benchmark being wrong. So let's say that it's not 50% better than the than the RTX 3090. Let's say it's about on par or slightly slower than the RTX 3090, but the power consumption and the price of the cards is better. So that means in terms of value, it's a better buy for miners. That is obviously not, that's going to be a really bad scenario still for gamers, but it's also the inventory. AMD themselves have hinted that the RX 6900 XT, is going to be limited, and this of course is also backed up by the fact that AIBs themselves are basically protesting, and in some cases I'm hearing throwing their the toys out of the pram, trying to get the permission to actually manufacture the 6900 XTs. I'm told that it could actually be AMD not just concerned about the numbers available, but also wanting a really good impression for the flagship, i.e. they don't want AIBs to be cutting corners on like cooling and that type of thing. I'm not sure whether that's true. However, the 6800 XT and the 6800 may also have some shortages for launch as well, and honestly, hopefully this is not the case. The reality is, though, that the total available market right now is huge because everyone wants to upgrade. It's traditionally true that most people will hold on one generation of cards. So, for example, the GTX 10 series, gamers who had that card, or Vega, for example, Vega 56 or whatever, now they want to upgrade. And honestly, why not? It's a really good time. If you look at it from just a pure value to performance standpoint, RDNA 2 or Ampere offer massive improvements in performance over their predecessors. We also have full feature set, of course, and all of this other stuff. The thing is, it's just the shortages. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that turns out. I actually got an update to my Ryzen 5900X. I was told that I am definitely on a back order. Originally I was told the 20th, but now I'm told it may even slip further. Apparently there was a screw up on the website when I ordered it, which is kind of ironic given AMD themselves had asked retailers Pinky Swear to not do this stuff. But I basically had a situation where the website did not properly register that the CPU had gone out of stock because so many people were trying to buy it simultaneously, despite the fact that there were multiple checks in place. I actually had to deal with a couple of different verifications, one browser verification and one, I am not a robot type of capture verification to purchase my processor in the UK. And I'm basically like position, I don't know what it was, like 1450, 1550, something like that in terms of back order. So hopefully I get the CPU soon. I more want it just for the channel, to be honest with you. I'm buying it primarily to cover for you guys, do builds and other stuff. So it's not like I have like no system and I'm basically just sat there twiddling my thumbs. So yeah. Anyway, I think I've talked enough in this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Your normal stuff if you have. Like, share, comment, subscribe. And I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.